All right. Hey, everybody. It's me. I'm Mr. D. Hopefully, you still remember me. Um, we are going to try a different format today. Uh, I'm going to try to do this lesson by recording it because philosophy is actually kind of challenging. It's kind of difficult to talk about and to teach when I'm not actually there with you. So, this is the best that we can get. So, we're going to try it. For us to understand how we got there, though, we need to go back to the beginning. Does anyone remember how humans lived when we first started out prior to farming? So we're going to start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. So, how did humanity live back then? Humanity, we lived as hunters and gatherers, and we lived in groups of 7 to 12. So they were nomadic and they moved around. Were they spiritual or religious then? Who knows? Yeah, you in the back. You're correct. They were probably not very religious, but they were probably spiritual. Well, why is it? They probably did believe in a higher being, and a lot of times they were probably polytheistic. But religion is the rules that we use to structure how we worship. So because they were in small groups, they probably weren't very religious, and they didn't really need to be. But then agriculture. Farming caused population to grow and to grow relatively quickly. Now people are living in one place and they tended to need to farm. So we needed to have workers, so we had groups of people living somewhere between 50 and 500. Now we have to get people to live together in peace and to follow a ruler. Now, how could that happen? We're not used to that. We usually have space where we can move around and get away from people, but now that we can't. So we need to have some type of structure. How do we get that structure? Well, if I'm the ruler and I spoke to God, then it's a little bit more likely for people to do what I asked them to do because all I have to say is that God asked me to do this or asked for this structure. So now we have people that are more willing to do what we say because of religion. Religion is the structure of which we worship, and it actually became the first form of government. Does anyone remember what that's called? Hmm. Yeah, you. Yes, theocracy. Great answer. I'm proud of you. Keep it up. Now, people began to notice patterns in the world around them, and they started to notice how things started to work a little bit differently. As they were forming, they saw that certain things happen when they have certain responses. So, initially, people thought that everything was caused by the gods. Natures and floods caused by Poseidon. Thunderstorms caused by Zeus. Volcanoes caused by Pele. Desert storms caused by Set. But then they started to notice that some things were a little bit different. But farming also, however, farming also led to specialization. So it allowed people to have more time. It allowed for specialization of jobs and surpluses of food. And that led to the workers and the elite. So some people had to work for a living and work a lot. And other people did work, but the type of work was different. But that also led to the elite, the people who own the land, which is completely different from now. So you have people who have to go to work all the time and work hard, usually physical labor, and you have people who have a little bit more time to sit and think. Um, that led to Greek philosophers. Not specifically the Greeks, but it allowed the people to have time to sit and think. Right? So let's start with the Sophist. The Sophist, I have a great picture of them right here. The Sophists were thinkers. Okay, they were teachers, and what they did is they sat around and they observed. Okay? They wanted to see how the world worked. Sophists wanted to understand the purpose of why we're here. Scientists, on the other hand, wanted to understand how we are here. Does that make sense? They wanted to know how things work. Sophists, on the other hand, weren't really concerned as to how things work. They wanted to understand the purpose and the reason that we're here. Why are we different than everybody else? What is the purpose of humanity? So how did they figure this out? They used what we call logic. Scientists look outward to find answers. Philosophers look inward, usually using our mind. Logic is a structured step by step, sensible process that helps you understand a problem or the world around you. Okay? And it's usually repeatable, kind of like science, but it's different. It makes sense. It's not based off of feelings, it's based off of a logical thought process that could be repeated. They help to create the art of civil discourse, argument making, and debate. Okay? So the purpose of this is the reason that this rose in this way is because in Greece, the types of government that they had was based on having discussion. The better you could structure your argument, the better chance you had of getting what you needed passed. So this is what the Sophists did. They taught this art. This art is called rhetoric or debate or anything like that. So that's the purpose of the Sophists, and that's what they did. Now, can anyone think of a word that's based off of the word sophist? Yes, you're right. It's sophisticated. Good job. Sophisticated comes from that term. Sophisticated are people who are elite and studious and like to study. So next we have Socrates. Socrates was one of the early sophists. Okay, and let's see if we can get a picture of Socrates here. So yes, that's Socrates. Now, Socrates was special. He was one of the first and most famous of the sophists. He believed that wisdom could be found within. Okay, so everyone had the aspect of being wiser. But the way that you became more wise is by honing or by challenging your thought process. Okay? He believed that everything should be challenged. Your thoughts, your beliefs, everything should be challenged, and anyone could be challenged. He believed that his students already had many of the answers that they were seeking. So his goal was to help them to figure out how to do that. He did that by questioning. He taught by incessant questioning. Incessant means a lot. He questioned over and over and over, and he allowed you or the student to find their answer because your answer is better than someone else's. Your situation is a little bit different. So, the way that you solve a problem could be different than someone else does, but the logical process to figure that out would be what's beneficial. Okay? So, his question caused his students to think logically and to problem solve. The questions caused the students to find better and better answers, and they learned this process, and soon they were able to do it themselves. However, he did not only just question his students; he also questioned the government and other political leaders. They did not appreciate that at all. Sometimes he made them look foolish because he was really bright, and they would trap themselves because they weren't always the most honest. But they also tried to manipulate um, how their arguments worked so they can get what they wanted passed. He usually destroyed those arguments, so they weren't very happy about that. Um, he refused. Caused problems with the relationship that he had with the politicians. He wasn't really good with them, but they usually left each other alone. But there was a tyrant that tried to force him to be a part of an arrest and execution of another political leader. He refused. He didn't think it was right. He didn't think it was fair. He also taught his students to question the government and to hold the government accountable. Politicians at that time did not like that. They weren't comfortable with that. So he was arrested and tried for corrupting the youth because they actually challenged the government. They weren't happy with that. He lost his case and he was forced to drink poison. So ultimately, that's how Socrates met his demise and he died. His most famous student was Plato. We'll talk about him in a few minutes. Socrates' biggest influence was our society today was the Socratic method, the way that he teaches by questioning and allowing the student to find their answers, and the belief that you should challenge your government, you should challenge your political leaders. That was his biggest influence. Now, Plato, honestly, is probably the least well known of the famous Greek philosophers. Not too many people really know Plato, but he's also pretty influential. He was considered the most traditional teacher of the other two, between the other two. He wanted a career in government initially, but he was horrified by what happened to Socrates, so he left that alone and became more of a teacher. He created a school in Athens, and it was called the Academy. There, a lot of students were taught in a very structured way. He was a very structured teacher. He was also one of the most prolific or the best writers. Not just best, but he wrote a lot. He wrote everything. One of the greatest debates that he had, that he believed in, is should we try to understand the world by using our senses, like feelings, touch, sight, smell, or should we try to understand the world through reason, by logic, using our mind? And hopefully you figure out that it was by using our minds. He was a very famous writer. The reason that we really know a lot about Socrates is because of his writings. One of his most famous books is called The Republic. The book talked about what an ideal society looks like. For Plato, he believed that the government should be fair and should always seek justice. He also believed that women should have the right to rule, and rulers should be philosopher kings, not military leaders. So our leaders should be highly intelligent, always seeking the truth, and always seeking justice. Um, Plato's most famous student is Aristotle. So, how did Plato influence our society today? Plato influenced our society by having a structured educational system and the government and the belief that the government should be fair and just. That's one of his biggest influence on us today. Now, the last one is Aristotle. He's probably the most famous. Aristotle may actually be the most well known. He probably is the most well known of the three Greek philosophers. He focuses teaching on writing about the government, astronomy, and political science. And political science is simply just understanding how people use politics to influence others through government activity. So it's just understanding how that works. Okay? His school was in Lyceum. He taught that the best way to learn is to observe, to watch, to compare things that are similar or different, and then to analyze. How are these the same? And that's the best way to come about learning. He also taught, and he had a major belief that's called the golden mean. This means that it's better to be in the middle or to be a moderate as opposed to be extremes. He believed that any extreme was probably pretty bad. People shouldn't eat too much, nor should they eat too little. The same would apply for politics and wealth. When people are at extreme opposite ends, it's hard for them to be able to come together and compromise because they're so far apart. And if you can't compromise, then it really hurts a lot of the people, the largest amount of people. Compromise is best for most people, okay? Because usually, if you're on the extreme, you're at a smaller group, you're at a smaller set of people. And his goal was to be able to help everyone the most, okay? Um, One of his most famous books that he has written is called Politics. Can anyone guess what that's about? Yes, you. Yes, it's about politics. Um, in his book, he divided the types of governments into three separate types: monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy. He believed that the best government had aspects of all three. And I'll give you a little bit of waiting time to see if you can figure out how that may apply to us. I knew you could. All right. His most famous student was Alexander the Great. Yep, that guy. The one that tried to rule the world, but valued knowledge and libraries, honestly. He built libraries everywhere he went and also took over Egypt. Okay? Now, how did Aristotle influence our society? He influenced our society because of his political studies. He and Plato were considered the fathers of political science. He also believed that the government should be a three-part government, which is what we do now. The government should have an aspect of it that is a monarchy, our president. It should have an aspect of it that's an oligarchy, kind of similar to our judicial system, and a part that should be democratic, which would be our Congress. Now, there's also a cultural connection with this between our philosophers. What is that cultural connection? Well, their belief system is basically the basis of our civilization, and that's our structure of our government, the structure of our society that came through Western Europe. But the key, though, is Greece was pretty much destroyed and decimated by Rome. Rome came through, they tore it apart, they burned a lot of their information, they burned a lot of libraries. The only thing that Rome really took from them was their belief in polytheism and architecture. It's the biggest thing that Rome really took from them. and then they tried to get rid of everything else. Okay, but after Rome decimated Greece, the Arab Empire and the Byzantine Empire came through and sifted through a lot of their information and their knowledge because they were scholars. A lot of them were scholars. So the Arab and Byzantine scholars came through and sifted through a lot of their information and translated the Greek philosophers' belief systems into Arabic. And when they translated that into Arabic, they took it back to study and they spread it throughout their empires. So the reason that we know about the Greek philosophers is because of their information was translated into Arabic. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Western Europe started to find some of these Arabic texts and then translated the Arabic text of the Greek text into something that they could read, and they started to base their civilizations based on that. So that's how we got to our place now in our country. Our country would probably look a lot differently if those Greek texts were never translated into Arabic. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. That was a lot. If you have any questions, feel free to replay it. Feel free to ask me. And we'll see, hopefully, that this downloads and works. All right. You all take care. Have a great day.